Hi everyone, my name is Charity Lane, and today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's not only important for understanding how Arizona's government works, but one that also reminds us that we as citizens have power. The powers I'm referring to are the initiative and the referendum process. These two tools are our main focus of what we call direct democracy. And Arizona is one of the few states that takes this idea very seriously by putting it directly into their state constitution. In a time when people may feel pretty frustrated with politics and even feel like they have no say in the decisions made by the government, initiatives and referendums offer a way for all voters to be able to make some real change. So let's start with some basic definitions. An initiative. What is an initiative? An initiative is a process that allows citizens to propose a new law or even a constitutional amendment. Instead of waiting for lawmakers to act, people can submit a proposal, gather enough support in the form of signatures, and have it placed directly on the ballot. If a majority of the voters support it, it becomes a law, and no approval from the legislature is needed. On the other hand, a referendum is a way for voters to approve or reject laws that have already been passed by the legislature. There are two main types of referendums. A legislative referendum. This is when the legislature puts a measure on the ballot for the voters to decide on. And then there's what's called a veto referendum, which is when citizens gather signatures to challenge a law that's already been proposed by the legislature and put it to vote to see whether it will really pass or not. So how do these processes actually work? Well, for an initiative, it begins when a group of citizens or an organization writes a proposal. They then submit it to the Arizona Secretary of State and request a serial number. Once that is approved, they begin collecting signatures. And this is where it gets tricky. To get their proposal on the ballot can take a lot of work and dedication. They must collect enough signatures to equal 10% of the votes from the last governor's election if it's a regular law, and 15% of votes for a constitutional law or change. For a referendum, the process depends on the type of referendum. Remember, before I talked about legislative and veto. If it's a legislative referendum, the legislature votes to send a proposal to the ballot. But for a veto referendum, citizens have to act fast. They must gather signatures equal to 5% of the votes cast in the last governor's race. And they have to do it within 90 days. So it's a race. If they succeed, the law is put on hold until the voters decide whether it's going to pass or not. So what's the difference between an initiative and a referendum? Let's look at that. First, there's the purpose. An initiative is about creating something totally new, a law or amendment that didn't even exist before. However, a referendum, especially the veto kind, is about challenging something that's already been passed by the legislature. Second, there's the source, or where the proposal came from. Initiatives always come from the people. Referendums can come from either the people or the legislator. And third, there's the timing and urgency. With initiatives, you're usually planning well in advance of the election. You've got plenty of time to gather your information and your votes, your signatures, excuse me. But with referendums, especially the veto referendums, there's less time to act and consequences are more urgent. Like I said before, remember, 90 days. Now let's talk about pros and cons, because there's always good and bad. The biggest pro of an initiative is that they give ordinary people like us a voice. If the legislature is acting too slowly or not acting at all, initiatives allow us citizens to take charge. This can be particularly important if the issues are controversial or are fresh topics that the lawmakers just might not want to touch. Initiatives can also encourage public participation. When people get involved and educate each other, they help shape their communities. However, downsides. Writing a good law is not easy. It requires money, lots of money sometimes, legal expertise, and lots of organization. Often, interest groups with a lot of money can dominate this process by running expensive ads and hiring signature collectors, and this can overshadow the voices of the people. Also, initiatives can sometimes create what's called inconsistent policy. Inconsistent policy is when laws or rules don't fit together well. They create confusion or they conflict with each other because they haven't been coordinated or carefully reviewed. Because they bypass the usual legislative process, they don't always go through the same level of amendment, negotiation, or debate, and that can lead to unintended consequences. Now, what about a referendum? One of the biggest advantages of a referendum is that they allow citizens to check on the government's power. If lawmakers pass a law that voters disagree on or don't like, then the people can push back. That keeps the politicians more accountable. It also ensures that important issues echo what the public wants. Voters get to have the final say. But again, there are challenges. The tight deadlines and signature requirements for veto referendums can be really hard. And when there are a lot of referendums on the ballot, it can lead to voter fatigue. That's a term that means that when there are too many complex issues to study and decide in one election, the voters just kind of stop studying and they just vote. So how does all this relate to the bigger picture of direct democracy? Well, the initiative and the referendum processes are written directly into the Arizona Constitution. In Article 9, Part 1, Section 1, a little bit of a quote here. The people reserve the power to propose laws and amendments to the Constitution and to enact or reject such laws and amendments at the polls, independently of the legislature. This is a powerful statement. It clarifies that in Arizona, the ultimate authority lies with the people, not just with its elected officials, but with the citizens itself. Over the years, Arizona citizens have used these powers to pass major reforms on things like minimum wage increase, healthcare access, funding for education. Sometimes the measures have been controversial. However, whether you agree with the outcome or not, the process itself is democracy in action. Initiatives and referendums show us that we don't just have to sit on the sidelines and watch when it comes to our government. We can participate. We don't have to wait for the change. We can organize, advocate, and vote directly on the policies that can make our lives better. So, to wrap up, the initiative and referendum processes are not just legal procedures. They're expressions of our power as citizens. Yes, they come with challenges, and yes, they can be complicated, but they give us a way to speak, act, and shape the laws that govern us. As students, voters, and future leaders, it's important to understand these tools and use them wisely, because democracy isn't just something that happens every few years on election day. It's something that we do every day, just by living our lives. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.